At my only son's Christmas dinner, his wife raised a toast to auction off who would keep the sick old woman. My son said, "I bid $5, while everyone laughed at me. That was when his millionaire boss said, "I bid $3 million. And my daughter-in-law fainted upon learning our secret. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you're watching from. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Margaret, and I am 62 years old. I never thought my son's happiest day would turn into my greatest humiliation. I was sitting at the back table of the wedding hall, watching David dance with Rebecca, his new wife. My hands were shaking slightly, not just from the arthritis that had been bothering me lately, but from the sheer emotion of seeing my only son so happy. I had worked 3 jobs for years to make sure he could afford this perfect wedding. The decor was elegant, overflowing with the white flowers and gold lights that Rebecca had insisted on having. I had chipped in my life savings without a single complaint, even though it meant postponing my own medical treatments one more time. After all, you only get married once, right? Rebecca stepped up to the microphone to make her toast. She looked radiant in her designer dress, her hair flawless, her smile blinding. I felt a swell of pride for the woman my son had chosen, even though I had always felt a certain tension between us. "Dear friends and family," Rebecca began, her voice clear and confident. "I want to thank you all for joining us on this very special day." Everyone raised their glasses, myself included. I smiled from my table, feeling like I was finally part of something beautiful after so many years of loneliness. "David and I have been talking about our future," Rebecca continued, "and well, there are certain adjustments we need to make." Her tone shifted slightly. Something about her smile grew colder. I looked at David, waiting for him to chime in, but he was just smiling, clearly oblivious to what was coming. "As you know, David's mother has been living with us lately due to her health situation." My stomach tied itself into a knot. Why was she bringing this up during her wedding toast? "But now that we are officially a family," Rebecca went on, her voice taking on a mocking edge, "we thought it would be fun to play a little game." Laughter started to ripple through some of the guests. I couldn't understand what was happening. "We're going to hold an auction," Rebecca exclaimed, raising her glass higher. "Let's see who gets stuck with the sick old woman." The room erupted in laughter. It felt like I had been slapped across the face. The air grew thick, suddenly impossible to breathe. My hands started shaking violently. "Come on, don't be shy," Rebecca shouted. "Who's got the first bid for Margaret?" The guests were laughing, assuming it was just part of the evening's entertainment. People started shouting out absurd numbers. 5 cents, $1. The laughter grew louder and uglier with every ridiculous bid. I searched desperately for David's eyes. He had to stop this. He had to stand up for his mother. But when I finally caught his gaze, my heart shattered into a million pieces. David was laughing. It wasn't an uncomfortable or nervous laugh. It was a genuine, highly amused laugh. He raised his hand and yelled, "I bid $5. The hall exploded into applause and roaring laughter. My own son, the boy I had raised completely alone after his father died, the same boy I had given everything I possessed, was selling me for $5 at his own wedding. A wave of nausea hit me. The venue lights suddenly seemed too bright, the noise deafening. I wanted to disappear, to just fade into nothing. But I was glued to my chair, paralyzed by the sheer humiliation of it all. $5, Rebecca repeated, fully playing the role of the auctioneer. "Do I hear more for the mother-in-law? She comes with a cane included." More laughter, more jeers. I could only sit there feeling every single word pierce through me like a jagged blade. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. Working double shifts as a cleaning lady to pay for David's college, selling my own wedding ring to buy him his first car, moving into a tiny, cramped apartment just to help him with the down payment on his house. I did it all so he could have a better life than mine. And here I was, being auctioned off like a piece of broken furniture on his wedding day. Tears started welling up in my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I refused to give them that extra ounce of satisfaction. They had already stripped away enough of my dignity for one night. "Going once," Rebecca shouted. Some guests were still laughing, but others were starting to shift in their seats, looking uncomfortable, slowly realizing that maybe this had gone way too far. $5. I looked around the room, desperately searching for even one face that showed a shred of compassion, one person who understood how wrong this was, but most just watched. A few were still smiling. Rebecca raised her glass one last time. Going 3 times, and I bid $3 million. The voice sliced through the air like a butcher's knife. The entire hall fell into dead, absolute silence. The laughter died in their throats. Every single head snapped toward the source of that deep, commanding voice. Standing at the entrance of the ballroom was Mr. Harrison, David's boss. He was tall, distinguished, wearing an impeccable suit, and sporting an expression that could freeze hell over. His icy blue eyes swept across the room with a coldness that made everyone shrink in their seats. Rebecca dropped her glass. The crystal shattered against the floor, the only sound echoing in the graveyard silence that had swallowed the wedding. David looked confused, borderline terrified. His boss had never shown any particular interest in his family. In fact, he barely even knew his mother, or so David thought. Harrison walked slowly toward the center of the room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. When he reached Rebecca, who was still frozen in shock, he smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Mrs. Rebecca," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't think you know who you're playing with." The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca was pale as a ghost, her eyes locked on Harrison like she had just seen the devil himself. David scrambled over, visibly sweating. "Mr. Harrison," David stammered, "I don't understand what's happening here. It was just a joke." Harrison stared at him with such intense gravity that David actually took a step back. "A joke," Harrison repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal low. "Humiliating a 62-year-old woman in public is your idea of humor, David?" I was still sitting in my chair, entirely lost. Why was my son's boss defending me? I barely knew the man. David had brought him up in passing, but we had never interacted beyond polite nods at company events. Harrison turned and walked toward my table. The guests parted for him like Moses splitting the sea. When he stopped right in front of me, he did something nobody saw coming. He bowed respectfully. "Margaret," he said softly, "I am deeply sorry for what just happened here." His tone was entirely different from the one he had used with David and Rebecca. There was a warmth, a deep-rooted respect that only confused me more. "Mr. Harrison," I whispered, "I don't understand." He smiled, and this time it was a real smile. "Of course you don't understand. I never told you." He straightened up and faced the room full of staring eyes. "But I think it's time everyone knew the truth." Rebecca had managed to scrape together enough nerve to step forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Harrison, but I don't understand what you have to do with Margaret. She's just David's mother." "Just David's mother," Harrison repeated, and that freezing smile returned. "Rebecca, do you have any idea who Margaret Whitfield really is?" My maiden name. Nobody had called me that in decades. Ever since I married Robert David's father, I had been Margaret Coleman. But Harrison had used my maiden name. How on earth did he know? 40 years ago, Harrison began projecting his voice so every person in the room could hear him. I worked as an assistant for a highly prestigious lawyer in the city. I was young, ambitious, but also very naive. He paced slowly across the floor as he spoke, commanding the room like a professor giving a master class. That lawyer handled the affairs of many wealthy families. One of them was the Whitfield family. Harrison looked directly at me. "Do you remember your grandfather, Patrick Whitfield?" My heart stalled in my chest. Grandpa Patrick had died when I was 15. I barely had any memories of him aside from the stories my mother used to tell about how he had lost his entire fortune on bad investments. "Mr. Harrison," my voice sounded foreign even to my own ears. "My family never had money. My grandfather lost everything." "That's what they told you," Harrison interrupted. "But it's not true." The room was so quiet, I could hear the blood pumping in my ears. David had inched closer, his face a twisted mask of utter confusion. Margaret Harrison continued, "Your grandfather didn't lose his fortune. He protected it. He set up a highly complex trust fund designed to shield the money from the gold diggers and greedy relatives who had been circling the family like vultures for years. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. That's impossible. My mother never— Your mother never knew, Harrison said gently. Patrick only trusted the details to his lawyer and to me, his most trusted assistant. The plan was for the money to be released to you when you turned 21, but there were complications. What kind of complications? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Harrison let out a heavy sigh. Your mother moved away after Patrick's death. She changed her last name when she remarried. We lost track of you. We have been looking for you for decades, Margaret. Rebecca had collapsed into a nearby chair, looking like she was about to pass out again. David stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Harrison like he was listening to a foreign language. The trust, Harrison went on, has been growing for 40 years. Investments compound interest real estate that has skyrocketed in value. He let the tension hang in the air for a second. Margaret, you are a millionaire. You always have been. The words didn't make sense in my brain. Millionaire. Me. The woman who worked 3 jobs just to keep her son fed. The woman who sold everything of value just to put him through school. The woman who had survived on discount coupons and thrift store clothes. That's impossible, I whispered. I've been poor my entire life. Because you didn't know, Harrison said with a trace of sadness. And because the original lawyer passed away without handing over all the files to me. It took me years, private investigators, and a considerable amount of money to finally track you down. When David casually mentioned his mother's maiden name a few months ago, I finally connected the dots. David found his voice. Are you saying my mother is rich? Not just rich, Harrison corrected him. Your mother owns properties worth millions, stocks, bonds, bank accounts that have been sitting there waiting for her for decades. Rebecca shot up from her chair so fast she almost tipped it over. That's ridiculous. Margaret is broke. She lives off David's charity. Harrison looked at her with pure disgust. Charity Margaret gave David over $200,000 over the years. Money she scraped together working jobs that destroyed her physical health. Money she could have used for her own medical treatments. I felt the tears finally break loose. All those nights pulling double shifts, all those brutal sacrifices. And I had a fortune waiting for me the entire time. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked Harrison. Because I needed to be absolutely sure, he replied. And because I wanted to get to know you first. When David started talking about his mother, about the sacrifices you had made, I knew you were exactly the person Patrick had hoped you would become. David rushed over to me, his eyes welling up. Mom, I didn't know. If you had known what— Something inside me snapped into place. The humiliation from 5 minutes ago, the way he had sold me for $5, the pure amusement in his voice when he did it. None of that vanished just because I suddenly had a bank account. If you had known what David— I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in years. If you had known I had money, would you have treated me with respect? He didn't answer. He couldn't answer because we both knew the ugly truth. Harrison held his hand out to me. Margaret, I think it's time you came with me. We have a lot to discuss. I took Harrison's hand and pushed myself up from the chair. My legs were shaking, and not just from the arthritis. The revelation had just rewritten everything I thought I knew about my entire existence. All around me, guests were whispering, trying to process the bombshell that had just been dropped. Margaret, wait. David's voice cracked with desperation behind me. You can't just leave. This is my wedding. I stopped and turned to look at him. My 32-year-old son looked like a lost little boy, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel that immediate, desperate urge to comfort him. David, I said calmly, 5 minutes ago you sold me for $5. Now that you know I have money, suddenly I'm important. Rebecca practically tripped over herself running toward me, the hem of her expensive wedding dress dragging across the floor. Her flawless makeup was ruined, streaked with panicked tears. Margaret, please, she begged. This was all just a terrible joke. I didn't know. We never would have— Never would have what? I cut her off cold. You never would have humiliated me if you knew I had money. That tells me everything I need to know about who you both are. Harrison placed a gentle hand on my back. Margaret, my car is out front. We can head to my office. I have all the paperwork there. It's time you saw what actually belongs to you. I nodded. But before I walked out those doors, I had one last thing to say. I turned to face the crowd of guests who were still sitting in stunned silence. "I want you all to know something," I said, my voice projecting louder than it had in decades. "Over the last 5 years, I have given David and Rebecca over $50,000 of my life savings. Money I earned scrubbing office floors until 3 in the morning, working back-to-back shifts at the laundromat, selling off the few valuable things I actually owned." David went completely pale. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." I kept going. "Because you two just proved to this entire room that it was never about love. It was only about what you could extract from me. And the second you thought I had nothing left to give you, turned me into the punchline of your wedding." Tears were streaming down my face, but this time they weren't born from humiliation. They were tears of absolute liberation. Margaret Harrison whispered, "Let's go." As we walked toward the exit, I could hear Rebecca sobbing hysterically behind us. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." Once we were inside Harrison's pristine Mercedes, breathing in the scent of fresh leather, I finally allowed my brain to process the weight of it all. For 40 years, I had lived in grinding poverty. I had sacrificed everything for my son. I had worked until my body broke down, and the whole time a fortune had been waiting for me. "Are you holding up okay?" Harrison asked, navigating through the neon-lit city streets. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "This is all just too surreal." "I understand," he said softly. "When I finally verified the connection between you and the Whitfield family, I couldn't believe it myself. Margaret, you've been living like a pauper, when in reality, you're one of the wealthiest heiresses in the entire state." We pulled up to a sleek, high-end office building downtown. Even though it was late, Harrison swiped his access card and took us up to his corner office on the 20th floor. The city views were staggering. I had never seen the skyline from that high up. Harrison unlocked a filing cabinet and pulled out a massive, thick folder stuffed with legal documents. "Your grandfather, Patrick, was a brilliant man." He started spreading the paperwork across his mahogany desk. He knew his family was crawling with people who only saw him as a walking bank account. That's why he engineered such a bulletproof trust. He walked me through legal jargon I barely understood, but the numbers at the bottom of the pages were crystal clear. Deeds, offshore accounts, stock portfolios, all of it in my name. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. "With 40 years of compounded interest and asset appreciation." Harrison paused, looking me dead in the eye. "Approximately $87 million. It felt like I had been punched in the gut. 87 million. While I was clipping coupons for canned beans and stitching up torn clothes so they'd last another winter. "There's more," Harrison continued. 3 physical properties. A house up in the hills valued at roughly $2 million. An apartment complex pulling in $15,000 a month in passive rent. And a lakefront cabin your grandfather absolutely loved. I reached out and touched the heavy paper with trembling fingers. My name was stamped on every single page, Margaret Elizabeth Whitfield, the ghost heiress who had been lost to time. "Why didn't my mother ever say a word?" I asked. "Because she was completely in the dark," Harrison explained. "Patrick trusted no one after several relatives tried to take control of his estate in his final years. Only the original attorney and myself knew the full scope of it. When your mother moved and took a new last name after marrying, the trail went cold. And my mother died when David was 12, I remembered out loud. I never even had the chance to ask her about the past." Harrison nodded in sympathy. "Patrick's strict instructions were for the lawyer to track you down the second you turned 21. But the attorney was killed in a car wreck 2 years after Patrick passed. His files were buried in the chaos of his firm shutting down." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the grid of city lights. All those sleepless nights. All the bone-deep exhaustion. All the times I had to choose between paying a hospital bill or buying decent groceries. Margaret Harrison said, his voice softening. "I know this is a lot to take in, but there's something else you need to hear." I turned back to him, bracing my nerves for another earthquake. When David started working at my firm 3 years ago, he casually dropped that his mother's maiden name was Whitfield. It took me months of quiet digging to confirm the bloodline. But once I did, I started watching him very closely. "What do you mean?" Harrison let out a heavy sigh. "David is not the man you think he is, Margaret. Around the office, I've watched how he treats people he views as beneath him. The assistants, the janitorial staff, the maintenance crew. He treats them exactly the way he treated you tonight. My stomach dropped. A small, desperate part of me had been clinging to the hope that tonight's cruelty was just a freak incident. A lapse in judgment fueled by Rebecca and an open bar. I've been waiting for the exact right moment to pull the curtain back, Harrison continued. I needed to do it when you could see his true character on full display. Tonight handed me the perfect opportunity. Did you know they were going to do that? I asked, feeling a strange mix of deep gratitude and creeping horror. I didn't know the specifics of their little stunt, he admitted. But based on the way David spoke about you at the office, I knew he had zero respect for you. I figured if I showed up unannounced at the reception, the masks would eventually slip. I sank back into the leather chair, completely overwhelmed. My own son. The boy I had loved and bled for. He really was the callous, cruel man who had held the microphone tonight. What do I do now? I asked the quiet room. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely at peace. Now, Margaret, you live the life you were supposed to be living for the last 40 years. The next few days were an absolute blur. Harrison walked me through the labyrinth of legal hurdles required to unlock my inheritance. It was dizzying to look at bank screens and see those impossible numbers staring back at me. A fortune that had been sitting in the dark while I counted pennies at the grocery store checkout. I checked into a 5-star hotel for the first time in my life, courtesy of Harrison, who absolutely insisted I deserved some luxury after decades of grinding poverty. The suite was larger than the apartment I had lived in for the last 5 years. The mattress was so plush I actually had trouble falling asleep that first night. David called me relentlessly. He left 47 voicemails that I flat out refused to listen to at first. Eventually, morbid curiosity won out over the pain, and I played a few of them. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk about what happened. It was just a stupid joke. You know I love you. Margaret, it's Rebecca. I am so sorry about last night. I was just stressed about the wedding, and I said horrible things. Please forgive me. Mom, people are talking. My coworkers are asking questions. I need to know if what Mr. Harrison said is actually true. The messages grew more frantic with every passing day. Margaret, we are family. You can't just cut us off over a misunderstanding. Mom, Rebecca is hysterical. She says if you really have all that money, we need to sit down and fix this. That last voicemail was the final nail in the coffin. They didn't care that they had broken my heart. They only cared about the bank accounts. Harrison stopped by the hotel on the 3rd day with another stack of paperwork. This time, he brought the keys to the house in the hills. Do you want to go see it? He asked. The property was magnificent, tucked away in an ultra-exclusive zip code surrounded by manicured gardens and boasting a panoramic view that literally stole the breath from my lungs. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a chef's kitchen with appliances that probably cost more than I used to make in a year, and a massive study lined with rare books my grandfather had collected. All of this is mine, I muttered, running my hand over the polished mahogany furniture like it might vanish into thin air. All yours, Harrison confirmed. The estate has been kept up by a management service all these years, paid out of the trust. It's completely turnkey. Move in whenever you're ready. That afternoon, while wandering the halls of my new reality, I found something that finally broke me down. Sitting on my grandfather's desk was a framed photograph of him holding me when I was a little girl, maybe 5 years old. I was sitting on his lap, both of us grinning at the camera. Tucked into the frame was a handwritten note in his shaky script. To my dearest Margaret, may you always know your true worth, no matter what the world tries to tell you. It was like the old man knew I would need that exact reminder one day. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the quiet. It was David again. This time I hit the green button. Mom, thank God. He sounded breathless, relieved, and desperate. I've been trying to reach you for days. I know. I answered, my voice totally flat. I've listened to your voicemails. We need to see you. Rebecca and I want to apologize the right way. What happened at the reception was awful, but we can get past this. We're a family. A family. I repeated the word slowly. David, would you have sold me for a $5 bill if I had been a total stranger? Silence on the line. Of course not, he finally stammered. But you're my mother. I assumed you'd get that it was just a joke. A joke that publicly humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. Mom, I already said I'm sorry. What else do you want from me? His tone was already slipping, the impatience bleeding through. Even now, knowing I held the keys to a fortune, he couldn't keep the mask of the repentant son glued on for more than 2 minutes. I want you to tell me the truth, I said. Why did you really let me move in with you two last year? Another heavy pause. Because you're my mother, and you needed help. David, we both know that's a lie. A frustrated exhale hissed through the speaker. Fine. We needed help with the mortgage, and we knew you had a nest egg saved up. There it was. The ugly truth I had been dodging for months. How much of my savings did you drain for that wedding? I asked. Mom, why does it matter now? How much, David? All of it, he finally cracked. We used everything you had in that account. But I was going to pay you back after the honeymoon when my bonus cleared. I felt hollowed out. They hadn't just bled my life savings dry. They hadn't even planned on telling me until the money was already gone. And now that you know about my inheritance, I said slowly, I'm guessing you don't plan on paying a dime of it back. Mom, you're sitting on millions of dollars. Do you really need me to cut you a check for a few $1,000s? That single sentence told me everything I would ever need to know about the man my son had become. David, I said with a chilling calm that surprised even me. I don't want to see you anymore. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your only son. Sharing my DNA does not give you a free pass to treat me like garbage. You're being completely ridiculous. It was one night, one stupid joke. His true colors were flying high now. The groveling son was gone, replaced by the entitled brat. You know what David Mr. Harrison told me? Exactly how you treat the people at your office, the janitors, the assistants. You treat them exactly the way you treated me. That is totally different. Those people are, what, beneath you, like me. No, Mom, you're not beneath me. You're my mother. But you sold me for $5. It was a joke. David jokes reveal exactly what we think deep down. And you thought it was perfectly fine to publicly humiliate me. I could hear him breathing hard into the receiver. Mom, if we don't fix this, people are going to think I'm a monster. They're already whispering at the office. Mr. Harrison is freezing me out. And there it was. The real panic. Not the pain he caused me, not the cruelty of his actions, but how the optics were affecting his career. David, I said with finality, I'm changing my phone number today. Do not contact me again. Mom, wait. I hung up and powered the phone down. Harrison was right. It was time to live the life I was owed, a life where I didn't have to smile and nod while being treated like disposable trash, not even by my own flesh and blood. That night, lying in my massive new bed in my sprawling new house, I cried one last time for the son I had lost. Not because he was dead, but because I finally accepted that the boy I thought I raised had never actually existed. But for the first time in decades, I felt something else too. Hope. Hope that at 62 years old, I could finally figure out who Margaret was when she wasn't sacrificing her own flesh to feed people who didn't appreciate the meal. 6 months had passed since the wedding that blew my life apart, and my world had shifted in ways I couldn't have scripted. I had fully moved into the estate in the hills, and every single morning I woke up struggling to believe the walls around me actually belonged to me. My new routine was something out of a fantasy. I woke up whenever my body decided it was done sleeping. No blaring alarms forcing me into the dark. I drank my coffee on the terrace, watching the California sun crawl over the city. I read through my grandfather's library, even picking up languages with a private tutor who came by twice a week. Harrison had morphed into much more than my wealth manager. He had become a genuine friend, maybe the first real friend I'd had in 40 years. He came by constantly, not to drop off paperwork, but just because we enjoyed each other's company. How are you holding up today? He asked during one of his visits, kicking back with a glass of iced tea on the patio. Different, I answered truthfully. Some days I feel this heavy guilt for living like royalty, while people out there are barely scraping by. Other days I feel like I hijacked someone else's life. That's par for the course, he assured me. You don't just shake off 40 years of survival mode overnight. I had started doing things I never dreamed I'd have the power to do. Quiet, anonymous donations, nothing flashy that would put my name in the papers, just targeted strikes of help. I quietly wiped out the medical debt for 3 families at the hospital where I used to volunteer. I funded full-ride scholarships for single mothers trying to get their degrees. It was my way of honoring the woman I used to be, while stepping into the shoes of the woman I was becoming. David had tried to break through my walls every way he could think of. He had shown up at my old dingy apartment only to find strangers living there. He had tried to leverage mutual acquaintances, but I had kept my new address locked down tight. His attempts were getting frantic. Eventually, Harrison broke the news that David's job was hanging by a thread. Apparently, the story of the wedding auction had spread through the corporate grapevine, and the firm's heavy-hitter clients were disgusted at the idea of doing business with a guy who treated his own mother like a punchline. In this business, reputation is currency, Harrison had explained flatly, and David proved he lacks basic character. That makes him a liability to the firm. I didn't take any sick joy in his downfall, but I also didn't feel that knee-jerk panic to rush in and save him. It was a bizarre, lightweight kind of freedom, realizing it wasn't my job to fix a grown man's life anymore. Rebecca tried a different angle. One afternoon, while I was out front pruning the rose bushes, I spotted her standing on the sidewalk, staring through the wrought iron security gate. She looked different. The expensive blowout and heavy makeup were gone. She looked younger, but also incredibly fragile. I hesitated for a second, then walked down the driveway to the gate. "Margaret," she said as I got close. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." "How did you get this address?" I asked through the bars. "I hired a private investigator," she admitted, her face flushing red. "I know, it sounds crazy, but I'm desperate." Against my better judgment, my curiosity spiked. "What exactly do you want, Rebecca?" "I want to apologize. For real. And not because of the trust fund, even though I know that's exactly what you're thinking. I want to apologize because I finally stepped back and realized how utterly vile my behavior was." I studied her eyes. She looked genuinely wrecked, but I'd learned the hard way not to buy the first pitch. "David and I are getting a divorce," she blurted out. "Turns out when you strip away the money and the status, we don't actually like each other very much." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. And to my own shock, I actually meant it. "No, you're not, and that's perfectly fine. I earned this." She took a shaky breath. "Margaret, I need you to know I have never treated another human being the way I treated you that night. I don't even know who I was. I got so toxic, so obsessed with being the flawless bride throwing the ultimate party that I completely lost my grip on reality." "And what is reality?" I challenged her. "People. Basic human decency. Treating someone the way I'd want to be treated." Her eyes pooled with tears. "My grandmother raised me better than that. If she had been alive to see what I did, something about her bringing up her grandmother cracked my armor just a fraction. I thought about my own mother, who died never knowing she was sitting on an empire, but who always made sure I knew how to look people in the eye with respect." "Rebecca," I said, keeping my voice soft but firm, "I appreciate you tracking me down to say this. But I can't just wave a wand and erase what happened in that room." "I would never expect you to," she answered quickly. "I just couldn't sleep until I looked you in the eye and owned it. If there's ever anything I can do to make it right." "There isn't," I told her without a trace of malice. "Some bells just can't be unrung." She nodded, wiping her cheek. "I get it. Just take care of yourself, Margaret. You deserve a good life." I watched her walk down the street, feeling a strange sense of closure. She seemed truly remorseful, but the bridge was already burned. More importantly, I realized I didn't actually need her apology to sleep at night anymore. Later that week, Harrison dropped a bomb over our weekly dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown. David had been fired. "Because of the wedding?" I asked, setting my fork down. "Partially," Harrison said, cutting his steak. "But there was a paper trail of other incidents. Apparently his attitude toward the support staff got even nastier after the rumors started flying. Like he was taking out his own humiliation on the people who couldn't fight back." I sat back in the leather booth, letting the reality wash over me. "How does that sit with you?" Harrison asked, watching me closely. "Empty," I answered. "A year ago, I would have been sick to my stomach, plotting out how to bail him out. Tonight, I just feel nothing." "That doesn't make you a bad mother," he assured me. "I know, it's just jarring. For 32 years, that boy was the sun in my sky. Now he feels like a guy I used to know." Harrison reached across the white linen tablecloth and covered my hand with his. "Margaret, can I tell you something?" I nodded. "Over the last 6 months, I've watched you come back to life. You look healthier, you laugh louder, you're more vibrant than you've probably been since your 20s. That's not a coincidence." He was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was the main character in my own story. I wasn't burning my health, my wallet, and my sanity to keep someone else warm. "There's something else I've been wanting to ask you," Harrison said suddenly, looking nervous, a look I had literally never seen on his face. "What is it? Would you want to go on a trip with me? I've been mapping out a tour through Europe, places I've always wanted to see but never made the time for. I figured maybe you'd want some company. I stared at him, genuinely caught off guard. In all our months of drinking coffee and reviewing portfolios, I hadn't let myself entertain the idea of anything more. Harrison, I said slowly, a smile tugging at my mouth. Are you asking me on a date? The ruthless corporate shark actually blushed. I suppose I am, if you're open to it. For the first time in years, I threw my head back and laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a bitter scoff, but a loud, uncontained laugh of pure joy. I would love to, I told him. Driving my own car back up the winding hills that night, I took inventory of my life. I had lost a son, but I had bought back my freedom. I had let go of the fantasy of a picture-perfect family, but I had discovered a spine made of steel. And maybe, just maybe, I had stumbled into a shot at real love. The kind that doesn't demand you bleed yourself dry, but actually celebrates the person standing in front of them. The exhausted, beaten-down woman who sat in the back of that wedding hall 6 months ago died that night. The woman gripping the steering wheel now was born from the ashes, and she was tougher and more whole than she ever thought possible. 2 years flew by. Harrison and I took that trip to Europe, and we never really looked back. We built a beautiful relationship anchored in deep respect and easy companionship. It wasn't the fiery, chaotic romance of your 20s. It was something vastly better. A quiet, unbreakable bond between two people who had survived enough life to know the value of peace and honesty. I was out back on a Sunday afternoon, soaking up the crisp autumn sun, when the doorbell chimed. It was odd, considering Harrison was out of state visiting his daughter, and I wasn't expecting deliveries. When I swung the heavy oak door open, the air left my lungs. David was standing on my porch, but it wasn't the slick, arrogant corporate climber I remembered. He was noticeably thinner, with dark circles bruised under his eyes. His clothes were clean, but they were undeniably thrift store finds. In his hands, he held a small, cheap bouquet of wildflowers, not the aggressive, overpriced roses he used to buy when he needed me to co-sign a loan. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. We just stared at each other for a long beat. My gut reaction was to slam the door in his face, but the way he was holding himself stopped my hand. The cocky swagger was totally gone. It was replaced by a heavy, grinding humility. "What do you want, David?" I asked, keeping my tone dead neutral. "Just to talk, if you'll let me." "How did you find this house?" "It wasn't easy," he admitted, looking down at his worn-out shoes. "Took me 6 months and a private investigator who let me pay him off in installments." Despite my walls, a spark of curiosity flared up. The David I raised would never put in 6 months of hard work for something that didn't immediately put cash in his pocket. 5 minutes, I said, stepping back to let him in. "Thank you." I led him straight through the house to the backyard patio, keeping a solid physical distance between us. He sat right on the edge of a patio chair like he knew he hadn't earned the right to get comfortable. "You look really good," he said, taking in my tailored outfit and my fresh haircut. "I'm doing well," I replied flatly. "I'm glad." He actually sounded like he meant it. "Mom, I know I have zero right to be sitting here. I know what I did at the wedding was unforgivable." "So what changed?" I asked, crossing my arms. "Why show up now?" David let out a long, ragged breath. "I lost everything. The job, the house. Rebecca filed for divorce. I had to move into a shoebox apartment and take a job working the floor at a hardware store." I braced myself for the pivot, waiting for the moment he'd ask for a check to bail him out. But he just kept talking. At first, I was blindingly angry. I blamed everyone but the guy in the mirror. I blamed you for cutting me off. I blamed Mr. Harrison for blacklisting me. I blamed Rebecca for jumping ship the second the money dried up. "And now?" I prompted. "Now I work shoulder to shoulder with people who remind me exactly of you," he said, his voice cracking just a fraction. "People pulling double shifts just to keep the lights on. People who skip meals so their kids can eat." And it finally hit me. I had one of those people in my corner my entire life, and I treated her like dirt on my shoe. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, rough and calloused now. "Do you remember when I was 8 and I got so sick you had to rush me to the ER?" he asked. I gave a tight nod. It was severe pneumonia. I'd been paralyzed by the fear that he wasn't going to make it. "You sat awake in that brutal plastic chair next to my bed for 3 days straight," he recalled. You lived off vending machine crackers because you refused to leave my room. And the second they discharged me, you worked back-to-back shifts for a month to cover the hospital bills. You were my son, I said simply. It was my job to keep you safe. No, Mom, it was love. And I grew up viewing it as an obligation. I convinced myself that because you were my mother, you owed me that blood. I never respected the toll it took on you. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, careful not to reach out for me. For the last 2 years, I've been going to therapy, paying for it with money I barely have, because I knew if I didn't figure out how I became that guy, I was never going to survive. And what did the therapist say? I asked, genuinely intrigued despite myself. That I cultivated a massive sense of entitlement that I never earned. Because I never actually had to bleed for anything, I never respected what was handed to me. And the second I faced real adversity, I turned into a coward who pointed fingers. David stood up and walked to the edge of the patio, looking out over the sprawling city below. Mom, I didn't come here to ask for a handout. I didn't even come here to ask you to forgive me. I came here because I needed to look you in the eye and tell you that I finally realize exactly what I threw away. And what did you throw away? I asked quietly. The only person on earth who loved me without conditions. The toughest woman I've ever met. My mother. His words hit me harder than I expected. But the scar tissue was thick. My defensive instincts flared. David talk is incredibly cheap. Behavior is the only currency that matters. I know, he said, turning back to face me. That's why I'm not asking for a damn thing. I just needed you to know the lights finally came on. He started walking back toward the glass doors, then paused. Oh, by the way, I heard Rebecca got remarried. She married a guy who treats her exactly the way I treated you. Now she's finding out firsthand what it feels like to be the disposable one in the room. I didn't feel a rush of karma or vindication, just a quiet, lingering sadness for another woman learning a brutal lesson the hard way. David, I called out before he stepped inside. He stopped. Yeah, what exactly do you do at the hardware store? I help people load drywall and lumber into their trucks. I walk them through the aisles and explain what tools they need to fix their houses. It's honest sweat. And for the first time in my life, I actually feel useful. There was a distinct shift in the way he talked about his job. The corporate elitism was dead. The sneering arrogance was gone. In its place was a quiet, grounded humility I had never seen in him. Can I ask you a question? I said. Anything. If I were still broke, if I was the exact same woman you shoved into your spare room 2 years ago, would you have spent 6 months tracking me down? David stood there chewing on the question, refusing to give me a slick, practiced answer. 2 years ago? Honestly, no. But today, yes. Because I finally learned that a bank account doesn't dictate a person's value. Action, sacrifice, loyalty. That's the only stuff that matters. And how am I supposed to know this isn't just a long game manipulation? I asked. You don't, he admitted with a shrug. I can only prove it by showing up differently from here on out. But Mom, I don't expect you to trust me today. I just hope that maybe down the line, you'll leave the door cracked enough for me to prove I'm not that guy anymore. After he drove away, I sat in the backyard for hours, replaying the tape of the conversation. This David was a stranger compared to the man who held the microphone at that wedding. But I also knew that desperate people can wear a good mask when they need to. Harrison flew back into town 2 days later, and I laid out the entire visit over coffee. Where's your head at with it? He asked, studying my face. Conflicted, I admitted, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Part of me desperately wants to believe he's done the work. The other part is screaming that I've already touched the stove once. You don't have to sign a contract today, Harrison said with that calm executive wisdom. If the change is real, it will be consistent. If it's a hustle, the cracks will show eventually. He was absolutely right. Time is the ultimate lie detector. 6 months rolled by. True to his word, David showed up at my gate exactly once a month. He never asked for a dime. He never asked for favors. He just sat on the patio, gave me updates on his life, and asked genuine questions about mine. He brought printed photos of backyard decks he had helped customers build. He told me stories about the regulars at the hardware store. Slowly, inch by inch, I started seeing the concrete proof of his evolution. It wasn't just his words, It was his posture. The casual disdain he used to hold for blue-collar workers had completely vanished. A year after he first showed back up on my porch, he noticed a section of the garden fence had splintered. He asked if he could come by on his day off and fix it. Not to score points, he clarified quickly, just because I actually miss doing things for the people I care about. I let him do it. He spent 4 hours in the sun, working quietly, totally dialed into the task. When he packed up his tools, I tried to hand him a $100 bill for his time. He physically stepped back and refused to take it. "Mom," he said, wiping the sweat off his forehead before he walked to his beat-up but pristine car. "I know I can never fully balance the scales for what I did, but I need you to know that every single morning I wake up trying to be the son you actually deserved from day one." As I stood in the driveway watching his taillights fade down the hill, the reality settled over me. The exhausted, broken woman who got laughed out of a wedding hall was dead and buried. But maybe the spoiled, entitled son I thought I had lost forever died that night too. And maybe out of all that wreckage, something real and resilient was finally starting to take root. I couldn't guarantee that our relationship would ever be completely bulletproof again, but for the first time in years, I actually believed it was possible. And after the hell we had been through, that sliver of hope felt like the greatest victory of all. Listening to Margaret's journey evokes a profound mix of heartbreak and triumph, reminding us that the true measure of our lives is never found in our bank accounts, but in the depths of our character. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the illusion of entitlement and the destructive nature of taking our loved ones for granted. We often forget that the people who sacrifice the most for us are the ones who deserve our deepest respect, not our careless disregard. When David hit rock bottom, he didn't just lose his status. He lost the false ego that blinded him to his mother's unconditional love. His journey back to humility proves that genuine transformation only begins when we take absolute accountability for our actions, without expecting immediate rewards or forgiveness. Furthermore, Margaret's ultimate liberation shows us the vital importance of setting boundaries. Walking away from toxic behavior, even when it comes from our own family, is not an act of cruelty. It is a profound act of self-love and self-preservation. By reclaiming her dignity, she not only saved herself, but inadvertently gave her son the harsh reality check he desperately needed to grow into a better man. This narrative inspires us to look at our own lives and ask whether we are treating the people around us with the compassion they deserve. It challenges us to value honest, hard work over superficial status, and to remember that trust once broken can only be rebuilt through consistent, humble actions over a long period of time. Ultimately, this story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, showing us that it is never too late to redefine our worth, to seek genuine redemption, and to build a life anchored in peace and mutual respect. From my personal perspective, this story serves as a profound mirror, reflecting the fragile balance between unconditional love and necessary boundaries. It breaks my heart to see how easily society equates financial wealth with human value, completely ignoring the quiet, everyday sacrifices made by mothers like Margaret. I believe that true poverty is not the lack of money, but the absence of empathy and gratitude in a person's soul. We live in a world that often rewards arrogance, but this narrative beautifully strips away those illusions to reveal that genuine respect is the only currency that lasts. What strikes me the most is Margaret's incredible grace in the face of absolute betrayal. She teaches us that vengeance is unnecessary when you have the courage to simply step into your own power and walk away. On the other hand, David's downfall is a necessary, painful reminder that the universe has a way of humbling those who humiliate others. Yet, I find a beautiful ray of hope in his eventual redemption through honest blue-collar work. It shows me that nobody is entirely beyond saving if they are willing to strip away their ego and do the hard, quiet work of changing their character. Forgiveness, as we see here, is not a free pass given out of obligation. It is a sacred space that must be earned through consistent, changed behavior. I feel that many of us hold on to toxic relationships out of guilt, forgetting that true love requires mutual respect. This story empowers me to believe that our past suffering does not dictate our future happiness. It is a brilliant reminder to appreciate the people who stand by us in our darkest times, rather than taking them for granted. Ultimately, my takeaway is that the most beautiful lives are built on a foundation of humility, honesty, and the courage to protect our own peace. I hope we all can carry this compassion into our daily interactions, treating everyone, regardless of their status, with the dignity they inherently deserve. Please note that the story presented above is created strictly for educational and inspirational purposes. This narrative is intended to convey moral lessons, provoke thought, and encourage personal growth. It does not constitute professional psychological relationship or financial advice. Listeners should apply these values to their own lives with personal discretion and seek professional guidance for their specific life situations if needed.